Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear friends of DigitalFUTURES. Welcome back. Firstly, I would like to welcome you all to open event of DigitalFUTURE 2021 online workshops, Inclusive Futures. To introduce the session of our program, I would like to share a little bit of the history and thoughts about the projects. So you can see the manifesto for DigitalFUTURES. Actually, we're offering the open educational content and accessible for everyone across the world. Growing as a digital platform, DigitalFUTURES aims to promote discussion around the broad range of contemporary issues in the discipline of architecture and associated fields, with a particular emphasis on the latest computational design and the fabrication technology. It's also address broader ethical and social issues such as environmental concerns within our ever-evolving, highly technological culture. So we have different events on this platform, including conference, talks, workshops, publications, and lectures. And every week we have a special DigitalFUTURE Yuan talk and DigitalFUTURE keynote organized by the team. And New especially organized the event. So we have very long-term collaboration among our friends. And the conference is yearly happened. So the whole day, we organize a very fabulous conference today to present 40 papers in the whole day time. And the workshops will kick off tonight and today. So hopefully, it will be a spectacular event in the whole year. And in the past few years, we have among almost 20 publications, including different books and introducing the technology in digital in architecture. So we're looking forward to have you all in our platform. So firstly, I want to introduce the special status of this year. We organized 109 workshops, and we have 258 tutors, instructors from 45 countries and 128 institutions. So you can see from this status, which is about the global view of the whole event. It's not only from Asia, but also States. This is instructors, you can see. From not only States, China, Europe, Africa, South America, it's all over the world from different universities, different institutions. So the background of instructors coming from 45 countries this year, all over the world, and 128 institutions. You can see the instruction numbers: UCL, Tongji, University of Innsbruck, University of Michigan, IAAC, and Tauberman, and ETH, NYIT, ICD. We have a lot of prominent instructors from these research institutions and universities. And also the background of the instructors have different, very different, including professors, founders of the company, and assistant professors, associate professors, and also the head and director of different laboratory, and also including some research assistant, research and lecturers as well. So it's across different kind of people. So I think DigitalFUTURE produce a special platform. It's not just based on the title or reputation, but it's just based on if you can produce new knowledge to the other people. So it's a sharing platform to all the participants, and no matter where you're from. But most importantly is it's totally bottom-up process to select the advisor instructors you like on this platform. And the background of the instructors, mostly from architecture, but we have some structural engineer, computer science engineer, and across different disciplines. So that's the background of the instructors. And this year, totally, we have 7,440 applicants. And 2,543 students turning in their formal application. And that means the membership, including last year, were around more than 15,000 membership on DigitalFUTURES platform. And the students are from 1,521 institutes, and the real participants to all the workshop is around 2,500. And also 3,800 students will audit in different workshops. That's the brief introduction of this year. And you can see the status. Last year, because of COVID, we put all the events, transfer all the events from physical workshops to the online workshop. We find extremely welcome to the whole world. So last year we have more than 8,900 applicants, and this year the number a little bit reduced, but still is a very high number, around 7,400, and a lot of participants. So we set up 109 workshops, and every workshops have at least more than 10 students. The maximum will have 50 students in one workshop. So these are the global view to see what's the applicants or the students from. You can see China is the biggest amount of the students, and we have a big number from Europe and from Africa, from the States, and from South America as well, and also Australia, different continent. We have a lot of participants from all over the world. So that's the percentage from the applicants' background: Asian, South America, Europe, North America, Africa, and so on. So, and also the students are from 128 countries around the world. So that's the biggest influential platform in the world on digital in architecture. And also the applicants have diverse education background. And we have 50% bachelor students, 47% master student, and 3% PhD candidates. So this is a discipline background. And this is very interesting. The students are from 1,521 institutions. And these are the numbers from different schools, because Tongji hosts for 11 years. So we have maximum from Tongji and UCL, AA, Tsinghua, and including FIU, HIT, RMIT, MIT, Yale, and a lot of universities around the world, including GSD, also from Jaha office, from Facebook. So it's quite cross-discipline, and it's quite welcome to all the universities. So this is the brief introduction for the participants of the workshop this year. So right now on Bilibili platform and YouTube, I have a lot of student participants participate to this opening event. And in the past few days, we are doing a very important fellowship to 4 prominent members who produce great support in the past 11 years to us, including Professor Akin Mangus, Professor Metta Ruscott-Thompson, Professor Maxie, and Professor Areti Marco Polo. So let me briefly introduce all of them. Professor Akin Mangus is Director of ICD at University of Stuttgart. And Professor Metta Thompson is Director of CETA at Royal Danish Academy in Denmark. Professor Maxie is the Director for CIM at RMIT University in Melbourne. And Professor Areti Marco Polo is the Center Director of IAAC in Barcelona. They are the leading figures in the field of architecture discipline and digital fabrication, thanks to their long-term loyalty and support throughout the decades of DigitalFUTURES initiative. Those fellow members will make their advice and offer more possibilities in several perspectives. And they will become the fellow member of advisory board and have the right to vote, nominate, and veto. In addition, we would like to invite them become academic committee members for our upcoming scientific journal named Architectural Intelligence. The journal will be peer-reviewed and aim for original research papers in the field of cutting-edge developments of digital in architecture. Furthermore, the Digital Future has always eager to become in the global knowledge sharing platform. It's an open platform to all the participants. We would like to promote a stronger students network and seeking for the further academic research and the collaborations between various institutions. So that's the back introduction for the events of this year. And the next, it's a great honor for us to invite Professor Luo Yongqi, who is a Vice President of Tongji University. Over the past 11 years, Tongji University and Tongji Architecture Design Institute gave a very strong support to the platform. And from last year, the platform goes to online, become a more international one. But we're looking forward to have more support from different schools across the world and set up a lot international collaboration on this platform. So let's welcome Professor President Luo Yongqi to give us opening speech. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Yuan. And it's really amazing. Ladies, gentlemen, honorable professors, students, good evening. And I'm here. And first of all, please allow me to welcome you to this Digital Futures annual event on behalf of Tongji University, as well as congratulations on the successful closure down of the third conference on computational design and robotic fabrication. It was great to see the incredible presenters and the talents of the world emerging through this open academic platform. And Digital Futures, as an annual academic event started in 2011, it has cultivated a community of students and scholars' ambitions in the field of computational design and digital theory, as well as pushed forward the scientific research and the practical exploration of digital design and fabrication on a global scale. With Digital Futures heading into its second decade, the world is also undergoing unprecedented changes. In a time anchored in a recovery and revitalization, the summer event series themed Inclusive Futures this year may further serve as an open and inclusive platform to bring the world together. Through the conventions of its talented community of young scholars, and professionals spearheading the discussions on the most advanced design. Thank you all for the support and you will learn from and enjoy this experience. And finally, wish the event series of Inclusive Futures a great success. Thank you. Thank you very much, particularly for Professor Yuan for organizing that. We are really, really proud of you. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot to the generous opening speech from President Luo Yongqi. And also we're looking forward to have more support from Tongji and also the other universities in the future. So the next, I would like to invite the co-founder of Digital Futures, Leach, Professor Leach, to give us an introduction for the Inclusive Futures, the special title, special topic of this year, and then also the Digital Future Award as well. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. Yes, last year was an astounding success, and we, following the whole Digital Futures World event, we maintain the platform and on a weekly basis, and we've been holding every Saturday, we've been holding sessions, which has kind of continued the whole process. This year, we were deciding whether or not to launch something of this scale, and we began to realize that actually we live in a world where things are still not as equal as they should be. Virus vaccination is not as equally distributed around the world as it should be, and many people are still disadvantaged. And we seized upon the possibility of some of the kind of big social changes that happened during the pandemic, Black Lives Matter and so on, and to try and bring a kind of new way of thinking about how we could look at architecture and how we could look at architectural education to open it up to be even more inclusive than it had been before. This year, we invited for our platform a number of representatives from around the world. We have actually among our team, we have someone from every single continent in the world apart from Antarctica, and we're delighted to have such a broad-ranging spread of individuals. So this year, the attempt was to really make it much more inclusive, and we're delighted also that we're able to host the whole event in 10 different languages, not just English, but not just Chinese, Spanish, Portuguese, but also Russian, Farsi, Turkish, Bangladesh, and so on, which is a wonderful kind of gesture and one wonderful way of opening up to other people around the world. Importantly, our panel is run by a group of volunteers, and we're really grateful for the contribution they make. And they do it because they love their subject. They love architecture. And we operate as a kind of bottom-up team, a collective around the world. There's no hierarchy. Nobody has any potential to overrule other people. And when we disagree on things, we vote. And it's turned into a wonderful community. And I'm really grateful for the support of all those individuals who are contributing towards this. So this year, we are expanding the range of things that we're looking at. We are moving beyond simply the technological into kind of environmental and social issues. During the course of the year, we've had sessions on global warming. We have had sessions on sea level rise. We have sessions on we have a session on the Amazon in Brazil and the exploitation of natural resources to try and open up the question. So we're going to broadening our whole approach. So this year we have the largest number of workshops. I'm delighted by the number of workshops that we have. We also introduced, very importantly, 2 weeks ago, in fact, we call a digital consortium. This is an attempt to share resources around the world. The idea that in the old days that there was one professor in one class and talking to one group of students doesn't make sense anymore. Now that we realize that we can use this platform to share ideas. We had a series of different lectures, which were really astonishing. Kicked off with Slavoj Žižek, and then we had a series on architecture and philosophy, a course on AI, and a course on performance-based design, and also a series of presentations by doctoral students around the world. And it was clear from those presentations how important this particular platform can be. Undertaking a PhD could be very lonely activity. So we brought everyone together for feedback on that sort of platform, and hopefully this will extend even further. So today we are introducing, we're giving a number of awards, and we're having a series of presentations. I would like to call upon my colleague Virginia to introduce Felicia Davis, who is one of the recipients of our Inclusive Futures Award. Welcome, Virginia.
Yes, thank you. So actually, what you're seeing on the screen here is the first award, which we'll give out in a minute because technical issues, but we've switched the order and we're going to give our first award, Inclusive Futures Award, to Felicia Davis. And I've known Felicia's work for quite a while because my research is also within the realm of textiles. But over the years, her work has extremely developed, not only in textiles, but in relationships of specific bodies, specific places, engaging social, cultural, and political constructs within her work. And so when looking at the awards and nominating an award for this year and really thinking about these cultural contexts, her installation at the MoMA exhibition this year, the flower antenna, really stood out as a really profoundly important project, integrating the ideas of digital futures, fabrication and technology elements, as well as dealing with the cultural and social elements that we are dealing with every day. So please welcome Felicia to present her work to us.
Thank you, Virginia, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to try to share my screen here. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. I guess we're spread across the globe. I'm speaking to you from lands in Pennsylvania that have sustained the Lenape and Susquehannock peoples that now make up the lands of Penn State University. Thank you so much, Virginia and the team at Digital Futures, for the invitation to come speak. Looking at what you've done with open sourcing education is really exciting. I think that the path that one walks as a Black architect or designer has many seams, or places that one improvises and stitches together to make a story, or really understand where one is in the world and how to make sense of things that cannot, under any circumstances, make any sense and never did. There are many gaps and lacunae that are bridged by these seams. And I found these places, or these kind of gaps, where one can find creativity. They're places of questioning, really, and ways of making that integrate fragments from the past, but also project a future. In my lab, Soft Lab, in the Stuckman Center for Design Computing, or the SEDC, we work on computational textiles, which are textiles that respond to their environment via programming, embedded sensors, and electronics, in addition to using the responses from natural properties of the fibers, where the response is used by the designer to communicate some type of information to people. And communication for our purposes in our lab means the sending of an intentional message or information through an aesthetic expression. So today I'd like to show and share with you some entanglements, so to speak, of working with textiles, computational, and soft materials. I find that the material itself shapes a way of thinking and working that leads to considering architecture and its practices in a different way. I would say that my lab has been working towards understanding of a soft system, which thus far to us accounts for and accommodates a technological system that can also register design in relationship to particular bodies in specific places, engaging in particular social and cultural constructions. So today I will share with you two parts of one project commissioned by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. These are a quilt and the antenna that Virginia mentioned that reveal some of the seams in my work that are areas of investigation. So many of you are asking, why is an architect working with computational textiles? There are two research directions in my lab. The first direction is more architecturally traditional, where we look at using textiles for sheltering. These are projects like tents, shade structures, etc. And a second direction is looking at the human body in space and trying to understand the potential for rethinking what architecture could be by understanding and augmenting the sensing body in its environment. These are projects that you wear on your body or use your body as part of the system. And my work and my students' work in the lab is to really relook at the role of textiles in building, not just as a way to achieve lightweight buildings, but to understand how we can use the fibers of the textile itself to communicate and how that impacts architecture. If you really start to think about it, computational textiles change the idea of a material. A material may be seen like in the above image, where the designer is weaving together a person or body, a body monitor such as a heart monitor, a mobile phone, a laptop, and a set of responsive yarns of fabrics, a power system, and the environment at large. This drawing shows one example of a textile material system. There may be other material systems, and we know there are other material systems that include other parts, such as a person who may be looking at what's happening to the heart monitor, or a manufacturer who may be connected to a wearer. So one might think, what style of material do we have here? What kinds of skills, tools, resources are needed to create such materials? And how should one classify or describe such materials? If materials change us as we change them, as Tim Ingold and J.J. Gibson and many others have argued, how are these materials changing our bodies and our way of thinking? So there are 4 points I'd like to share with you that we have learned through working in our lab. A first point, work with actual material requires improvisation and a call and response mode. Another way of saying this, as James Gibson, the psychologist, said, if you can decide to feel the dent made in your hand by a table, or you can focus on the edge of a table, so you can toggle in between being a subject and an object. A second point, both Annie Albers, famous weaver, and Tim Ingold make, is that working with materials requires improvisation, and thus materials make space for your mind to experiment. They're open. That once you're in conversation with any material, it causes you to be inventive because you're improvising. A third point to the first two that Ingold develops is that making this shapes your mind. It makes you think about certain issues in specific ways because of that selected material, the nature of that selected material. The fourth point and last point from Annie Albers' paper on textiles called Work with Material of 1944. Material, that is to say unformed or unshaped matter, is the field where authority blocks independent experimentation less than in many other fields. And for this reason, it seems well fitted to become the training ground for invention and free speculation. So let me talk to you a little bit about this project that was commissioned by MoMA. There were 3 curators for the show: Reconstruction, Architecture and Blackness in America. These were Sean Anderson, Associate Curator at MoMA, and Mabel Wilson, Professor of Architecture and Professor in Africana Studies at Columbia University, and Ariel Jan Krosnick at MoMA as a curatorial assistant. And this group really changed what normally happens at MoMA. Instead of having one curator that developed a kind of whole thesis for the show, we had a collaborative group that were really amongst themselves debating the critical issues that the show was framed around. So I could sense from the beginning of their invitation that this would be an historically important exhibition, and I was deeply honored to contribute to the show. In addition, these 3 curators assembled an amazing advisory board of Black artists, architects, curators, urban designers who attended 2 meetings with us where there's a conversation and critique of the work that was planned for the exhibition by each of the 11 artists who were going to be presenting in the exhibition. And what you're looking at here is part of a photograph from the first meeting with the group Practicing Refusal Collective, who are Mabel Wilson, Sadia Hartman, and Tina Kampt. And at this first meeting, really, we were presenting potential trajectories and thoughts in all our works, and really debating what we wanted to see and have presented in MoMA. one of the things that we talked about as a group of artists was really whether or not we should actually present in MoMA, because MoMA was not necessarily known for presenting works by artists of color and hadn't been terribly open before. So we were thinking, should we actually present here? Should we, is this a space where we'd like our work to be presented? And in the end, the group of artists got together and decided that it was an important venue, that our platform could be expanded globally and that others could then join the conversation. As we saw with the Floyd protests, these expanded across the globe. So we appreciated the kind of call and response that we had in setting up the work for the exhibit, a kind of conversation before even making the work. And as an act of refusal, we as a group of artists and architects and designers formed the Black Reconstruction Collective at our second member in November of 2019. And the overarching purpose of our organization is to finish the project of Black emancipation that was started in the Reconstruction era of the United States, but eroded by successive structures put in place by white supremacists. So we're a 501c3 not-for-profit organization here to provide intellectual and monetary support for artists, scholars, and designers who are creating new knowledge about design for the African diaspora. And the point of the BRC was to take the work outside of the museum so that it goes beyond us individual artists and project it into a broader realm. A second point was really to produce a space where artists, designers, and others could try things or look at things that may not be looked at because of cautiousness or outright blindness. So this is a photograph of the bridge into the exhibition that shows what we call our manifesting textile that has the mission statement of the BRC on it. And it covers the name of Philip Johnson Gallery because Philip Johnson was a Nazi sympathizer and tried to initiate a fascist group in the United States. So this is our way as Black artists to prepare a new ground for the show inside MoMA. So in the show, if I might say, refusal happened in a variety of ways within the works presented, and reflection in my own kind of personal analysis. What I saw in the exhibit as refusal was that most of the artists, or all of the artists, refused to repair, fix, or otherwise clean aside kind of historic acts that were manifested in 11 cities that we were asked to choose and work within. Such acts include the regular toolkit of wiping out Black communities in the US. These tools included the use of highways to cut Black communities off from larger settlements, to use what we call eminent domain to declare Black neighborhoods as in poor repair and seize lands for other purposes, such as redlining. Rather, what one could see in this exhibition was a reimagining of what could be, an imagining of what was good about Blackness. What I saw was a potential for making dreams. What I saw was a refusal to be kept away from dreaming. So each artist was asked to select a city in the United States. I selected Pittsburgh because I had recently moved to Pennsylvania and wanted to know more about it. I had done some work there before, but really had not looked into the dynamics of the Black neighborhoods there. So I chose the Hill District to begin, to understand what stories were there. There are two parts to the work commissioned by MoMA, transmissions and receptions, which I'll go over briefly. The transmission part is a quilt that connects the Hill District in Pittsburgh, which is a historically Black neighborhood, and it tells stories about the district. It's meant to travel outside the museum and be a kind of space of creation with community members outside. The second part, the reception part, is the fabric antenna that was exhibited in the museum. So the quilt was a way of really making sense of all the research that I was finding on Pittsburgh. It was not intended to be an architecture of the project, but became a method of questioning. And the quilt is a computational textile and points towards those experiences and skills with sewing, working with soft materials, and brings them into architecture. It's a method and operates as a real material, as metaphor or heuristic device for thinking about operations and concepts in making and architecture. For us in the studio, the gaps in between the images, the order of images, the gaps in between the panels allowed us to understand a bit more about what was going on in the photos and what this meant to us. Sewing down to close our circuits was a kind of signal of another phase of the quilt. But we're still in the beginning because COVID actually shut down our attempt to take this quilt on the road into communities. And so we worked on it in our studio while we could, and also in our homes. The quilt really starts a conversation, or it's intended to start a conversation with people about making, and is a repository of history. When touched, the copper in each panel activates a speaker and tells that story of what happens in that panel. And as I said, we'd like to take this quilt on the road now that things are opening up again, and continue to hear and make new panels with stories with residents in the Hill District. So for us, what was important about this material was that it's collaborative and incrementally built. The lily pad that you can see in the lower half was designed by Leah Beakley. She's a designer and computer scientist at the University of New Mexico, was my advisor at MIT, and permits the fashioning of do-it-yourself work. This is supported by a network of online tutorials and programs. And this network is also part of what we understand to be the material. For many of the works we do, the ability to access and use these inexpensive do-it-yourself components is the difference between connecting with others or not. So in moving from deciding what piece and where, an idea I have been thinking about in this quilt is allowing the quilt to remain open as in its potential to put the pieces together in a different order that speaks to quilt making. An example of quilt making craft can be seen in this project by my PhD graduate student, Farzana Aghazian, which is developed for her coursework in my class on fiber composites. Farzana calls this the circuit game, and it looked to teach young children how to close a circuit using pieces that were connected with conductive copper ripstop nylon and stainless steel coated fabrics. And the idea is to close a circuit and light up an LED by tying groups of these together. And you can find this work published in the Proceedings for Distributed Ambient and Pervasive Computing 2020. I think this open technique could potentially work for the quilt to allow many different ways of telling stories with pieces, so that when we do take the quilt on the road in the coming year, we can change what connects to what and change the overall reading within the stories. So here's a detail of that quilt showing a scene that speaks to how I set up my lab at Penn State. The lab is a way of foregrounding the making experiences that many of us had as kids and still working with soft materials. These materials call for another way of fabrication and thinking about architecture that connects both to the scale of the body, because we often try to start making things like clothing and then move up to very large scales of architecture. Working this way also returns you to the specifics of your own body, not some abstract body that you're building for, but a particular body. a scene like this that you see in the quilt panel was a very familiar scene to me growing up. And I felt many of the things that I'd been working and thinking about came from this deep well of knowledge about these materials. You know, I worked with my mother like this around a table with my sister and aunt who would come to visit us from Chicago, and we would make our own clothes. So we never wanted for anything. We had everything that we needed to be schooled well, etc. But this is a way that our family connected and shared gossip and was able to talk and reconnect with each other. This image is an image from Wiley Avenue in the Hill District, which is a neighborhood that was destroyed in the early 60s to make way for a civic center, really. And this particular panel in the quilt talks about Freedom Corner, which is its kind of early stage. It was a place where people gathered before it was kind of redone with a fountain and kind of words in the paving. It was a place where people came to gather for protests, much like you saw in the protests of 2020. So the reception part of the project is what I call the flower antenna. And the flower antenna was located in the museum. And the flower antenna speaks to those invisible networks formed by electromagnetic waves that we all grapple with in terms of privacy and liberation. The flower antenna is a symbolic responsive structure, and it's a receiving antenna. 34 industrially knitted cones embedded with pink copper yarns transmit the presence of electromagnetic waves via high-pitched live sounds in this gallery. The black flower serves to make visible and present the workings of an invisible urbanism that floats above the physical city, supported and constructed by electromagnetic waves. These invisible waves are a new global ocean, making it possible for people to connect through the internet like we're doing now. However, traversing this ocean in our everyday practices is as perilous as the Atlantic of the Middle Passage. The black flower is a reminder of this other invisible space that is also being constructed and needs attention for a more life-valuing future. The pink underbelly of the antenna shows embedded copper poly yarn, which is what permits the collection of the invisible waves in the gallery. The form of the flower was selected to give us an opportunity to study a gradient of parametrically sized cones. And these were drawn in Kangaroo and Kiwi 3D, simulated to see if we could predict the sizes and shapes of the cones. This is an important aspect in terms of getting the knitted part of the structure to fit the fiberglass compression rods that were going to be pre-cut and make sure that everything fit together. We tested a couple different methods of machine learning and have looked at Mehdi Thompson's method that she uses at CETA, including scanning and a couple of other techniques. We're publishing part of this research, a simulation process for architectural knitted textiles at IASS in Surrey, which is coming up in a month or so. And also there will be more on the machine learning processes that we have tested to follow. Underneath, you can see more of the pink yarn, which helped us stabilize and add predictability to the cotton yarn that we selected. And there were many, many steps and iterations to this project in the making of the cones. Just to go over a few in this slide, the upper left photo shows a third iteration of a drawing for one cone based on algorithms made in Grasshopper and Kiwi 3D. And we've kind of halved it here and flattened it. The biggest challenge that we encountered was what I call get engaged. or predicting how much the material would stretch. This issue took us the longest time, and we'd made a digital model that had been shown and promised in the museum at a certain size, and we wanted to make sure that it ended up as that size. So one tube that we made at the beginning never finished stretching. It's still stretching to this day, which is a really hair-raising and scary moment in the fabrication process. Once we had the 3D drawings, we flattened these into cones or half cones. And these were translated into the Shimaseki knitting machine, which you can see in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. And that particular machine was able to make a seamless tube for us. The third challenge was really fitting our cut or bent to size compression members to the knitted material. So where the compression and knitted system came together occupied a lot of our kind of correcting and adjustments in terms of our algorithms as we came to understand its material properties. Although I have to say, one of the things that I enjoyed the most was exploring, without having to sort of, make the museums pre their expected shape, was really exploring different things that one could do with these cones and exploring and improvising with the material. Lastly, we had fantastic antenna help from Aaron Lewis, a student at the Swedish School of Textiles. Aaron has been exploring the potentials of electromagnetism as a phenomenon using textiles in both weaving and knitting, and really introduced us to the artistic potential of this invisible medium. I highly recommend looking at her work, Disobedient Antennas, Breaking the Rules of Textile Antenna Design, which she presented at DIS 2020, and also her work, Electromagnetic Expressions in Textile Design, 2017, that was presented at the Nobel Museum scientific presentations. And we are also working on a paper for this project. So that will be available soon for everyone as well. So what we try to do in developing computational methods, tools, and designs for soft architectures is to connect with people emotionally, register their presence, to provoke questions about the order of our society. We view softness as a powerful quality to think about reconstructing. And I'd like to share with you a video of what the textile antenna was like in the gallery, just a little bit of the sound that it picked up.
Felicia, I don't think you shared the sound when you shared the video. Maybe you need to stop share and reshare and checkbox the sound when you share it.
Okay, I'm gonna do that. Hang on.
Yeah, I think we'd love to see the video with the sound.
Okay, sorry about that. So in closing, the contributions to architecture made by computational textiles is cultural, social, and technical. And really, these materials change how we think about our bodies in an environment and in space. And with that, I will close, and potentially we can take questions at the end of all the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. That was an incredibly powerful way to open our presentations today. Very, very powerful. Thank you so much. I'd like to move on to our second recipient of an award, Wolf Prix, together with Daniel Bolajan. Wolf is somebody who, in many ways, doesn't need any introduction. But I don't want to give you the kind of the official introduction. I want to give a very personal overview of how I felt that Wolf has really changed my life and changed the lives of many people. I was a student in the 80s in the University of Cambridge in the midst of postmodernism. This, to my mind, was one of the most unfortunate moments in the history of architecture. I had been fired up by seeing the Sydney Opera House and other amazing buildings, and had signed up for architecture expecting to find something similar. Instead, we had postmodernism, all that kind of the stuff that Charles Jenks was talking about, the kind of applied classical motifs in the facades of buildings and so on and so on. And I've got to say that I struggled a little bit with that. Then at an amazing moment, I guess it must be towards the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, we found ourselves with a kind of almost a resistance to that kind of conservatism, a sudden kind of bursting out of design energy, a kind of a new kind of spirit in architecture, maybe not a spirit in architecture, but something that really reignited architecture. And it was such a delight to see this incredible movement, often referred to as decon and deconstructivism. It doesn't really matter exactly what it was, but what it was doing was really giving architecture, igniting it and filling it again with passion. As a young professor in the 1990s, I would talk about this with my students, and I would show them photographs on my slides. In those days, we had slides in a carousel. We didn't have PowerPoint. I would show them slides of this crazy guy in Vienna who was burning wings with his students, and I'd read them out this manifesto that he'd written about making architecture come alive and no more Biedermeier facades and so on. And that, to my mind, was one of the great sort of revolutions in architecture. What we had from then was an incredible outburst of energy, not just from people like Wolf Prix, but also from Zaha Hadid, from Rem Koolhaas, from Frank Gehry, and so on. This was the architecture that I was looking for. A few years later, I made a pilgrimage to Vienna, and I went to go and see an office in the top floor of a lawyer's office, top floor of a building. And I managed to argue my way in, claiming I was a famous professor. And it was really astonishing. It was well worth the pilgrimage to go all the way to Vienna to go and see this incredible building. A building by Wolf Prix that he'd managed to get built because he claimed it was art and not architecture, therefore it didn't have to conform to the building regulations. More recently still, I had the privilege of being on a judging panel for a building in China, in Chengtai, China, a museum of science and technology. I was there with Matthias Del Campo, and Wolf was was presenting his work, and he came in and as full of energy and dynamism as ever. It was very clear that he wanted to win this project. And somebody asked him at one point, "Well, isn't your building a little bit expensive, Mr. Prix?" And he said, "If you build my building, you are going to have to enlarge your airport." He was referring, of course, to the impact of the Guggenheim on Bilbao itself. More recently still, we have seen this astonishing project coming out of the office of COOP HIMMELB, the Deep HIMMELB project, which to my mind is by far the most important and successful example of the application of AI to architecture worldwide. A real delight to see. So I want to also introduce Daniel Bolajan, who will be presenting with Wolf today. Daniel Bolajan is a good friend of many of us in Digital Futures. He's part of our team, as it were. He's a personal friend of mine. He was teaching at a Florida International University a few years ago and is just down the road now. Daniel is somebody who he comes initially from Romania. And unbeknownst to me, I gave a lecture in his School of Architecture in Iminco many years ago. And I can only remember the lecture because of somebody, and I was presenting all the amazing computational work that was coming out from places like the AA and so at the time. And I can remember from one of the comments from one of the students, he asked me a question. He said, "But isn't the straight line sacred?" So I wasn't sure whether my lecture had any impact. But years later, I found out that one of the students in the group there was someone called Daniel Bolajan, who had been so inspired by some of the work that I'd shown of other people, not my work, that he decided to become a computational architect. He shifted to the Angevanta to study there, the school that Wolf Prix had really brought alive while he was in charge there, and turned into one of the great centers of architecture, bringing in Zaha and Greg Lynn, Sanford Quinter, and many others. And then from then on, he went to go and work for Wolf at COOP HIMMELB. Daniel is now a professor at Florida Atlantic University, where he is enthralling his students with the work that he's doing on AI, and also other students as well. All I can say is that there are other students who are being motivated by Daniel, hopefully in the way that the work was that I showed at that lecture today. So it's a great pleasure to be able to give our Digital Futures Project Award to Deep HIMMELB. To my mind, absolutely the most important project that we've seen in the application of AI to architecture. It's also a great delight and pleasure to be able to welcome Wolf Prix to give a presentation along with Daniel Bolajan. I can't think of two more talented architects and computational architects in the world that we could have here today. And I'd like to welcome you both and congratulations on the award.
It's my turn now?
Yes. Yeah.
It's my turn to say thank you for being granted with this Digital Future Award. I appreciate it very much. I would like to share that with my team, especially with the AI team in our office, and the leader is Daniel Bolajan. We miss him in Austria very much, but I think he has a better life and more possibilities there in your school or wherever he's teaching. What I wanted to say is I've never expected to get an award for our digital work because I was always very skeptical of methods which depend on machines or software. Because I still do believe of the sentence quote of the psychoanalyst Erich Fromm, who said the society who delegates liveliness to machines expresses a deep dead wish. But the word Himmelblau, sky blue, expresses interest in liveliness, especially in architecture. Therefore, the title of our team, Himmelblau, is more than complicated. It's actually very complex because we had two dreams when we started. Now, one dream when we started. We wanted to build clouds because we said Himmelblau, sky blue, is not a color, but the idea to have architecture flexible and buoyant like clouds. This was the first dream. The second dream I have now, and it reads like that. When a new project comes in, let's say an opera building somewhere in Pakistan, we will give all the data to team, to the artificial intelligence teams. By the way, I want to rename artificial intelligence by architectural intelligence, because otherwise we share too much with very foreign levels, and we are not trained to argue like the doctors, like the doctors in the field of medicine or scientists. We have to bring up our own interpretation, our own meaning to the word artificial intelligence, so we call it architectural intelligence. What I want to mention is that it's very important. And I just finished a text which I would like to read to you, because that statement of our situation right now, of the situation of architects right now. The text reads like, who fails to fight for the meaning of terms leaves it to others and eventually speaks a bureaucratic artificial language. We architects are in a very, very bad situation now, because we have forgotten that it is our job. Can you hear me? No.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. We have forgotten that it is our job to design or build environment in 3 dimensions. This is escape. This is escape to the ivory tower of theory, leave right of design investors who, under the title of optimization, buildings that lack any claim to architecture. Thus, minor subjects in the architecture schools becomes major. And if students no longer want to build, that is, turn buildings or cities into architecture, because they want not to be mingled up with a capitalistic building system, or others, they are more interested in the digital processes without converting them into architecture, into buildings. They've chosen the wrong kind of study. Meaning, a student of mine just said to me, I'm not interested in building, I'm more interested in the social procedure. And I said, guy, you are in the wrong place, because school and not a school for social investigations. For without acquiring competence in these areas through intensive studies, they remain dilettante architects. And our built environment is left to the profiteers who have no interest in our future. And the French philosopher Derrida, who studied the unconscious in the creative process, the so-called blind spot, was only partly right when he stated, as he told me, that often the smallest drawing has more influence than thousands of cubic meters of built space. He forgets that theory in architecture must be translated into reality to have meaning. Otherwise, architecture theory remains only theory. So I would like to start the lecture now, which is hopefully working now. Title of the lecture is not Say Himmelblau. Title of the lecture is Deep Himmelblau and Other Ice Creams. just a short introduction. Achtung, thank you. The theory. In our point of view, a building only becomes architecture if it reaches the meta level in form or content, construction or material. We are living now, mankind is now living on a very uncertain ground. Old structures are going to die, but they are not dead yet. New structures are coming up, but they are not born yet. So our job or our intention as students of architecture or architects should be to invent things, new things, never seen before, new way of thinking. We could, it's the upcoming new stuff. This is very important. If we don't do that, the old structures will die through and will new structure with the same negative energy they already have.
Okay, we can see you now.
Okay. I have to speak up anyway. What we always try to do is to push the borderline of the, to jump over the borderline of the grid. And we always said, how does the black spot gets on the wing of the butterfly? Is it coincidence or is it mathematical proof? I think it's coincidence, trial and error. And that is a sentence which leads me to our belief in an open society. And all our buildings try to be the iconic signs for an open society, wherever and for whomever we build it. Therefore, I think we will not allow art to be exiled from architecture. I think this is a problem and it's a disadvantage for architects. If there is art in architecture, for some architects, but it's a big advantage on the other hand. The disadvantage is that we always try to find the best solution for the problems we are faced. And therefore we are working like idiots to get through with all these new ideas. And the other sentence, which is very important, reminds me on the topic of the open society, which is trial and error. In our term, in our language, I say everybody is right, but nothing, really nothing is correct. Like clouds, Himmelblau. This is what we still thinking is a goal we should aim for. And I'm sure we are very close. We are very close. And AI, the artificial intelligence, will help us. So the second dream I have, not only to build clouds, but the second dream is why we will use the artificial intelligence, the architectural intelligence, is imagine we have a project coming from Pakistan. What we will do is we will give all the data, I said it before, to our ADA, because we call out this team ADA in reference to Ada Lovelace, the lady who really invented the point of departure for artificial intelligence. We give it to Ada, and the whole office went to a bar. Coming back, everything is almost finished. What we will do, we will a little bit improve the organization of the building. We will a little bit change the model, the printed model. And then we give it to the second level of, and this is, the second level is also connected to the structural engineers and to the building modeling, and then the whole office goes to an island for, let's say, 3 weeks or months, to the Maldives, for instance. And when we will back, the project will be finished because Ada made it perfectly. What we have to do is to send our fee to the client. And the next step will be, we are going to the island again and waiting for the next project. HIMMELB, clouds. This is our first project where we used air and a thin foley as a building material. Blowing up a volume inside of this volume, movable platforms can create different spatial situations.
Mr. Prix, my apologies for interrupting. Are you sharing the screen? We don't see anything sharing right now.
Danny. Yeah, no. Danny, can you hear me? No.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah. Danny, can you see something?
Yes, we can see.
Can you hear the music?
Yeah, we see the question, what is architecture?
Okay. The cross-section to our work, I will show you sometimes when I'm there. It's much better. Danny, I would say, because it's very exhausting and it doesn't look good to me, you should take over and I'm leaving. It's too boring, I have to say. Yeah, and I don't want to have that interruption with this connection. Thank you very much for giving us the award. I'm happy, and this is funny that future I will be able to show. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prix. Yes, I hope that we can have maybe another session where we can actually present the work without these technical issues. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to briefly then go through the HIMMELB project. And just for because of the time constraints, I will try to keep it a bit short. So the HIMMELB project is something that we started quite a while back, like a few years now back. And what we are looking at ways how we can teach machines to learn. And here, when we are saying learning, we are not talking about human learning, the way that humans learn, but can machines in a way understand and learn in their own way how to generate designs, or can they learn to help us augment our native abilities? So here then we engage with different processes, and during this presentation that I'm going to show a few processes that we engage with and some ideas that we have about this. So the team of the HIMMELB right now consists of Mr. Prix, Caroline, Schmidt-Bauer, myself, and Filena Basita. And there are three main areas of interest that we have, which is the side of Gestalt, organization aspects, which are more strategic in a way, topics that we deal with, like program organizations and functional and so on. And then technical aspects, which they have to do with mostly surface rationalization, optimizations, and so on. So in all these categories, we have in a way this kind of sides of augmentation and automation, because certain processes, they might require automation, other processes, they require augmentation. So for us, we are looking at multiple levels of design, meaning that we are looking how we augment design, but also how we augment in a way design processes, how we can engage in a way with this kind of tools in a very open system of continuous feedback in a way. And here, just to show a few examples. So this is mostly an application of technical aspects. So I'm just going to show briefly. There are a lot of other processes that we engage with, but I'm just going to show one or two examples. So here we are dealing mostly with rationalization of surfaces and panelizations, creating families, and therefore in a way helping us in a way to keep certain projects in budget by creating those kind of families of panels, let's say. Other topics for sure, we are exploring also ideas of environmental analysis and how we can bring in a way these topics early in the design process. And here, for example, you have this kind of idea of you have physical models that are like massing models that you work with early on in design process. And can we somehow inform our design process early on? Can we inform it by these kind of concerns? Yeah, this is not meant necessarily to constrain design, but mostly just to inform. Yeah. And we have then different levels and different strategies that we engage with. And this kind of idea, can a machine in a way help us and augment perhaps perception and the way that we envision certain designs. So here we have this kind of idea of can a machine maybe create for us certain interpretations that then later can inspire the designer to pursue a certain in a way idea. So here we are also looking at ways how we can control almost like the perception. But again, here I'm using perception for the lack of a better word. But I don't mean necessarily perception as we understand it from a human perspective. Yeah, I'm saying perception or the way that the machine sees something. Yeah. And here we are actually looking at, can we constrain the network's perception so that we are just focusing on certain aspects. So for example, usually as a designer, when you look at something, you're already biased to see certain things in a certain way. Yeah. So for us, is can we remove in a way that kind of preconceived way of seeing things? Yeah. So that's why it's interesting for us to wonder and to ask, can we limit perception? For in this example, can this network only understand perspective, only understand composition, not the perspective of things? So like that, in a way, you're playing in a way with perception. Yeah. So we are lucky in a way to be an office practice of about 50 years now. And we have roughly around 600, 700 projects that we work with or we developed during these years. And it's great for us because we are able to have this kind of massive body of work that we can use as a data set in a way to inform this kind of networks that we work with, or the DPMLAW network. Of course, the goal here is not necessarily just to replicate the COOP style, but the idea is to learn from COOP and then further create new strategies and new designs in a way. Yeah. COOP as a style is very and as a style, it's very diverse. So it's not this kind of office where you have mostly just variations of certain ideas. And for us, then a very big question when it comes to neural networks was, how can we treat all these examples and this variety of projects that we have? How can we treat them equally in the sense of a style of a building that is less represented, or a building it's not less important only because it's less represented? Yeah. Could be that you have certain buildings, like I mentioned a few times, like it might be that you have certain buildings that are very crucial when it comes to composition and style and aesthetics, but we never had a chance maybe to build that project. So therefore, then you're not going to have that much data for that specific project. Yeah. So what you want to do, somehow you want to balance that. Yeah. You want to have the same kind of the network being able to understand all the projects and their importance from that perspective, not through the sheer size of data sets that we have. So here we look at this kind of ideas of networks or DPMLAW network able to generate and to imagine almost like this kind of COOP-MLAW universe and this kind of new designs. So at this level, these are mostly image-based, so we consider this sort of gestalt, a synthesis of form in a way. But then we are also looking for charrette aspects of 3D. And right now, this is one of the only networks actually out there that deals with this with the 3D aspect in this manner. I'm not saying that there are no other 3D networks that try to engage with 3D, but not in this manner. Yeah. So this is a unique, in a way, approach to this, and this is an algorithm that I developed recently. And here we are looking then at 3D objects that we have in the office, 3D buildings. Yeah. And then try to see, can we synthesize in a way these 3Ds, and can we maybe explore this way our designs. So it's all great when it comes to this kind of COOP-MLAW universe and DPMLAW universe that is created by the DPMLAW network. And one challenge for us will be once you have this kind of hundreds and thousands of outputs generated, how can we navigate, how can we engage in a way in this kind of open process of continuous feedback in a way between designer and the machine. Yeah. So the idea here is not necessarily to have the machine overpowering in a way design and overriding, let's say, designers, but the idea is like we engage with this kind of processes sometimes in the office, and that's why I'm saying it's unfortunate that Mr. Prix was not able to present the first part of the presentation, because I assume that there we had like this kind of different methods how we engage in design in the design process, different techniques that we're engaging with, and so on. And the idea is this idea of an open system of continuous feedback in a way. So we design something, we apply a sort of technique that helps us understand things in a different way, and then that changes the way that we understand design, and we keep on continuing this kind of loop. Yeah. So here the same idea continues. So the idea is for this kind of networks in a way to inform design, to have this kind of continuous back and forward between the designer, machine, designer, machine, and so on. Yeah. So we are looking here at ways how we can explore this kind of universe created by the HIMMELB. And for us, it's also important to think about these aspects of how the designers are going to interact in the office, keeping in mind that the designers are not necessarily always very proficient when it comes to coding skills. So we are looking then at ways to navigate and to engage with this kind of network. So here, for example, we have a snapshot in a way, 100,000 data points from the latent space of the network. We have them plotted out, and then designers, they can easily engage with this universe in a way. So this approach then will be almost like visually you engage with the universe, and you search and explore in that kind of way. So that will be this kind of idea. So you have the universe, you just click on certain thumbnails that you have there, or images that you have there, and then you engage that way. Then we have also some other processes that are a bit more algorithmic, that they deal mostly with searching for through this kind of universe in a algorithmic manner. So in this aspect, I'm just looking, let's say I'm interested in this design that I managed to find out through that kind of exploration. And now I'm just looking which are the most similar designs or similar options that are in this universe according to this image, or which are the most dissimilar in a way options and designs in this universe. So that helps us in a way explore design possibilities. So here it's also this idea of projection. So many times we look at this kind of results, like the one that you see in the right upper corner, and it's almost like we start to read into that example, a building, and maybe that's a facade, and there's an interior that has some light in, and you have this kind of transparent glass and the structure behind, and so on. So in a similar way, what we can do also, we can reverse this order, and we can project in a way these kind of images in the memory of the network, and then ask the network to imagine perhaps those kind of things. So this kind of latent spaces and this kind of universes, we develop them at different levels. Like the first one, it was mostly image-based, dealing with this kind of aspect of Gestalt. So we are approaching also these aspects of program and function. And at this point right now, it's still the same kind of more 2D approach. Yeah. And of course, then we also engage with other aspects of 3D that I'm going to just show shortly. So we are trying to approach things. Okay, so unfortunately, I don't know why this one's not showing up. Yeah, we were supposed to have here a slide with the 3D. My apologies for that. So we are trying to address this from multiple perspectives. So another approach that we have here is also this kind of text-based, in a way, kind of search, but it's a text-based that allows us, or the network is able to understand the meaning, in a way, of the sentence that it's inputted. And then based on that meaning, in a way, it's trying to search in this kind of vast deep HIMMELB universe, or COOP HIMMELB universe, is trying to find, in a way, those kind of designs and those kind of results that are defined by the sentence. So in this instance, for example, you have an irregular shaped office tower, and you have a value of 0.29. That's the closest then. And if you look at the image, it resembles, in a way, an irregular shaped office tower. Yeah. So like this, these are just methods then how we can engage and explore this space as designers without necessarily being computationally savvy, let's say. Yeah. So the idea is, how do you facilitate in a way this kind of feedback and open system so that we can easily engage in this kind of back and forth in a way process. So the same happens here. This is just a more structured in a way search, where you are saying, I'm interested in an office, tower, tower with a double cone, or tower with a glass facade, tower with a parent structure, tower with a plinth, tower with a base, and so on. Yeah. So you can very strategically in a way search for certain features that you are interested probably in certain design. So the idea here is not to generate design through text. Yeah. That's a different discussion that probably I'm not going to go in there. Yeah. So we have also the aspect of 3D that we push currently, where we try to have our networks understand now our projects from a 3D perspective, not only from an image perspective. Yeah. So currently we are mostly working on this aspect of exterior of the building, and then slowly we'll probably start to address also the interiority of the buildings, and maybe later we are going to try to learn the relations between interior and exterior of a building and so on. Yeah? But it's always, as maybe you hear me talking about AIs, it's always a sort of process that you have to build up, and certain things they cannot just happen like that. Yeah, we cannot just jump into having relations between interior and exterior just like that. Yeah, it's a sort of process that we have to go through, a network that is able to learn the exterior of things, and maybe you need a complete different network to understand the interior of things. Yeah, and then you need a complete different network perhaps to understand relations between interior and exterior. So it's always this kind of very strategic in a way, then a way of how we work with this. So in this case, this is a very small snapshot in a way of this kind of latent space that the network, that 3D DigitalFUTURES network is generating currently. And then you end up with this kind of idea of interpolations of features between multiple 3D models that we have. So currently, it might be that this is a sort of a limited form of let's say, creativity from the side of the network, machine creativity in a way, but it's something that we use as a starting point, and then later we are going to see how can we transfer maybe certain features from one 3D to another and so on. Yeah, how we combine all those kind of ideas. So this is going to be the last video that we are showing, which is showing this kind of idea of the network being able to understand 3D in a way semantics of the project. So I would like to say thank you for the award. I think like also Mr. Briggs expressed, we really appreciate. We really appreciate, yeah, that our work is appreciated. Yeah, I think there is a lot of thought and a lot of ideas that were put into DigitalFUTURES, and it's great to see this effort appreciated. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Daniel. What an amazing project. And it's obviously an ongoing project. We will see more. I was delighted to see that actually in the last week or so that you've managed to shift style GANs from 2D to 3D. I mean, really an amazing development, and such a powerful project, so well thought through. Amazing. So congratulations on the award. Very well deserved. I'd like to move on then to our final award, another Inclusive Futures Award to Ron Rael and Virginia Fratello. They are no strangers to the computational world. Not only did Behnaz Farai and I include their work in an architectural design issue on 3D printed body architecture, but they were award winners at Acadia a few years ago in Michigan. And they have a very diverse practice that engages with many different issues. Their practice is called Rael Fratello, but they also have an emerging objects group foundation as part of their presentation. But the award today is for a particular project that is actually, it doesn't fit so neatly into those other categories. An installation on the border with Mexico that has already won, in fact, many other awards. What is so delightful about this project, which has been actually the result of many years, is the kind of way in which it engages with a certain wit with one of the sort of fundamental challenges that we face today, the idea of the problem of exclusivity. And in many ways, what we're trying to do in Inclusive Futures is to overcome that. The idea that each nation operates individually on its own and ignores everyone else is at the root of our problems in many ways, not just in terms of environmental conditions, but also in terms of the COVID situation right now. Unless we help other nations to, in terms of vaccination programs and so on, the problem is not going to go away. So the idea of somehow being inclusive and embracing the other, embracing everyone throughout the world is fundamental to Inclusive Futures. All we can do in our own way is to address the question of education and open up those boundaries and overcome all those kind of those lines of exclusion that have been there. And that's what we're trying to do. And also to overcome the whole, let's say, the whole economic exclusion that's happening. One of the fundamental ideas behind Inclusive Futures is the idea that education is a human right and not just a privilege of the wealthy. Not everyone can afford to go and study at some of the elite schools in the world, nor indeed can everyone afford to pay for some of the software that is out there. So to find ways of addressing that imbalance, to find ways of overcoming that division, are fundamental to everything that we are doing. I was completely delighted to find out, I didn't know about this particular project on the border until it won an award in the Design Museum in London. And what a delightful project. I should say that the project itself goes alongside a delightful book, Border Wall as Architecture by Rael, which is one of the most beautiful things I've seen and read. It is not only is it inspired in many ways, but it is humorous and witty, and it has the most incredible reviews on Amazon, I've got to say as well. So it's a great delight to be able to award our Inclusive Futures Award for this particular project, the Tita Tota Wall project. Ron is with us here. Virginia is watching, I think, from on a hiking somewhere. Ron, welcome. It's great to see you and congratulations.
Hi, Neil. Thank you so much.
Oh, you were there? Okay, you're not hiking.
Yes,
Great.
I'm here. I'm here. I have a slow Wi-Fi, but I'm here. I just want to thank you and Digital Futures on behalf of Ron and myself for recognizing this project, the pink teeter-totters at the border between the United States and Mexico. You know, we started working on projects at the border around 2001. And we saw the early wall construction being built as a result of the 2006 Secure Fence Act. And we saw immediately the kind of absurdity and the cruelty of this wall. And in 2009, we started making these proposals for projects at the border that would actually bring people together, that would use the border as a vehicle for not dividing, but promoting togetherness, right? And it took us 10 years, literally 10 years from conception to completion to realize this project at full scale. And on May 28, 2019, we were able to show the world that play can be an act of both joy and resistance. And we've continued to work at the expanded border between the United States and Mexico, not only the current political border, but also the historical border as well. And our work there examines relationships between the past and the future. You know, we often look back to look forward. We look at traditional and indigenous materials like mud and clay and rethink how they can be used in the future through technologies such as robotics and 3D printing. And it has been an important goal of ours to think about how design and technology can be used as vehicles to bring people together, right? To be inclusive and to create new paradigms for the future and how we live and work together. So I thank you again. I'm going to hand it off to Ron because I have this slow Wi-Fi connection, but he's going to share some examples of recent work from us. Okay.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, so much. We are exceptionally honored to receive this award. And as Virginia mentioned, I'm going to share some of the work that we've been working on. And let me just begin the slideshow here. As you mentioned, we're part of two practices, and Emerging Objects, which deals exclusively with 3D printing, and Rael Fratello, which works more on social projects in the borderlands. And we've been thinking about how the borderlands are a site of hybridity, where people of different languages and cultures and belief systems come together, and new kinds of ideas are born from that. And we, in fact, spent all of COVID over a year in a very special place that crosses the border between southern Colorado and northern New Mexico, called the San Luis Valley. It's a high alpine desert that's bordered by 14 and 13,000 foot mountains. But what's very special about this place is that it is the northernmost frontier of the former territory of what was Mexico before the Mexican-American War. And so we think very much about this idea of the expanded borderlands, a borderlands that is not only geopolitical, but also the borders that move into realms of technology, or those thresholds between the past and the future, as Virginia said, or between materials or between ideas. In this landscape, it is a landscape where the legacy of those historic borderlands still exists. Earthen structures that were the remains of the previous peoples who have been colonized several times, my own ancestors. And we're actively working on restoring about 8 of these buildings in this landscape, including our own house, which we use as a teaching tool, an instrument for teaching people about traditional methods of building, using mud, traditional indigenous practices of mud plastering houses, and also traditional ways of cooking as well. And we've embarked on a project that looks at traditional indigenous cooking and food ways, and working with communities to explore those ideas in the expanded borderlands. And I'm going to show you a very short clip of a project that we've embarked on, where we are building these traditional mud ovens in immigrant shelters along the US-Mexico border as a way of bringing community together.
¿Qué construimos? Me encanta. Aquí reconstruimos personas y reconstruimos la humanidad.
Como te digo, soy guatemalteco, ya no soy ningún muchacho jovencito. Acostumbramos a hacer el pan según la costumbre de nuestro pueblo. Tú me dices si se está viendo para poner más madera, porque ya estamos close.
So this project of building traditional mud ovens along the border comes from an understanding of the ways of making in this landscape, but ways of bringing communities together. And so in immigrant shelters where people have been stuck along the border, especially during the previous regime in the United States, in immigrant shelters from countries around the world, we have used this ancient cooking technology as a way to bring the communities who are coming to these shelters together. And these are communities that are not only coming from Latin America, but from around the world, from Russia, from Haiti, from India, and bringing them together to literally make and break bread to become a community again before they move onward with their journey. And we've begun to construct a number of these mud hornos as kinds of objects of resistance, objects to bring people together, but also resist the idea that these walls exist between communities and we can come together around things that are very common to us, which is earth and food and fire. What's very beautiful about that clip that I just showed you is they're interviewing the woman who's a nun who runs that shelter in a documentary film that's now at the Venice Biennale in the Italian pavilion that you can see. But she's asked by the documentary filmmaker, "What are you making here?" And of course, in the background, we're building this mud oven. But she doesn't reply, we're building a mud oven. What she says, in fact, what we're doing here in the shelter is we're rebuilding humanity. We're rebuilding people emotionally and physically and psychologically as they've come to this point on an incredible journey and a journey full of hardship, and they're about to embark on another journey. So this idea of using mud is essential to our practice. And during the previous regime, we began to build upon a technology that we innovated about 6 years ago of 3D printed clay, 3D printed ceramics, which now has taken, so many people are doing it. But then we were embodying it with political ideas and ideas of geography. And the leader of the previous regime had mentioned that there were in fact bad hombres at the US-Mexico border. And our experience was something very different, that there are not bad hombres. But what was interesting to us as well was that the regime leader didn't say there were bad hombres at the border, which means they're bad men. He said, in fact, they're bad hombres at the border. And we're like, well, that's interesting that he actually recognizes this beautiful gradient between light and dark that we understand in the art world, and to think about how that gradient is a gradient of culture. So we embarked upon this idea of the bad hombres. We discovered that in the hairstyle world, that maybe what's on the left is a bad hombre, when the right's a good hombre, I guess. I don't know, but we began to think about how material itself could express ideas. We used clay from Republican state, the then Republican state of Georgia, and clay from the Democratic state of California, to think about how we might weave together materials to have an expression of an object that in its totality expressed these different ideas and different materials at different scales, in the scale of the object, but also in the scale of the detail as well. So the darker and lighter hues are these hombres that are expressing ideas that we expressed through the technology of 3D printed ceramics, introducing this technology of additive manufacturing into a tradition of ceramics that have been around for 10,000 years. We thought, wouldn't it be more interesting if we were able to take soil from Mexico and soil from the United States to do that? And we begin to experiment with ways of using local clays along the US-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Mexico, involving 25 ceramic artists and professors from the University of Texas, El Paso, to create a project that looked at the frontiers of mud in different ways. We worked with the students, the ceramicists, the professors, to explore clay sites of traditional clay harvesting along the border in both countries. And we harvested them, and we discovered this amazing complexion of clays, from whites to browns, even greens you might see. And we developed this software, which we now call Potterware, which is available now if you go to potterware.com, but a very accessible software for especially ceramic artists who may not know how to use a 3D modeling program, or may not know how to use a 3D printer, but are interested in that technology. And this made it very accessible for ceramic artists to then very quickly make these kinds of forms that we're making. So we have made this available to the world. It's now being used in universities and colleges and high schools all over the planet. And it's just a simple way of making 3D printed functional pottery out of the ground that's just outside wherever anyone is on the planet, using very simple techniques. And we thought that the 25 ceramic artists would make 25 pots, but they ended up making around 270 of these beautiful objects during this project. This idea of taking the clay from the ground and printing was part of a larger endeavor that we've embarked on for the last 10 years, is how can we make buildings this way? I showed you some of the adobe mud structures that exist in this landscape, but could we use 3D printing to do that? Well, some of our first experiments embarked on taking ceramic printed objects to make cladding for tiles of buildings. And in this project called the Cabin of 3D Printed Curiosities, we built, or we used the opportunity that was made available to the residents living in the San Francisco Bay Area because of a housing emergency, where they relaxed the building code. So you could build up to 1,200 square feet on a piece of property without the consultation of an architect or going before the planning board, to see if our innovations in 3D printing could be used to make a small accessory dwelling unit. And so we 3D printed about 4,000 of these ceramic cladding units that were attached to a 3D printed substrate using this technique we developed 6 years ago, which allowed each ceramic component to be different, even though digitally it was exactly the same. So the very different wiggle allowed for each of these tiles to be almost perfect, but not quite, as if they were a handmade ceramic object. The front facade of this building employs many of our innovations in 3D printed materials, using 3D printed wood and cellulose, 3D printed cement, 3D printed Chardonnay grape skins that were harvested from the waste products of wine production in Northern California. Each of these tiles holds succulents that grow very well in the Northern California climate, making and situating this house sort of, in a way, very much responsive to the climate and to the material ecology of place. The interior of the cabin is bioplastic, which is very common, of course, but exploring ways that could be used in cladding and its translucency and its materiality and where that material comes from. And so it's backlit to the cabin itself as its own lantern that can set the mood of the cabin during different parts of the day or night or evening. Each tile is actually different and attached to the wall. So it builds upon past traditions like pressed tin panel, but instead of having one mold making the same panel over and over again, we are making every panel different because of the capabilities of additive manufacturing. We're also experimenting on how we make furniture, for example, the chairs, the tables, the lighting fixtures, using several of our techniques and material innovations. And you can see how the house, the cabin transforms throughout the day, and the evening set it up for a place to sleep at night. So these ideas of using additive manufacturing in the borderlands and hybridizing technologies and materials and techniques allowed us to begin to get closer to a fundamental idea: is how do we print much larger structures out of materials that are available on hand? Because this was in fact our very early goal. We weren't interested in just playing with pottery only, but these were study models for much larger structures. And in this idea of returning to the borderlands, we realized that we had to develop not only materials, but also hardware and software to enable ourselves to make accessible, inexpensive strategies for printing at large scale. So we developed this schematic for this very portable robot about 5 years ago. And given our limited resources, we partnered with a manufacturing company that was manufacturing ceramic printers at that time to think about how we can scale up. And so we partnered together to make a very accessible robot that uses SCARA technologies that could print larger structures. And once we finalized that, we took it back out to the borderlands for the first time in history to begin to 3D print the material that people have been using in that landscape for thousands of years, not only to make large-scale proto-architectural structures, but functional pottery, both using the material at hand that you can find within just a short distance of the construction site itself. We call this project Mud Frontiers because we see mud as something that's mobile. We can take this printer anywhere and drop it down in the landscape. It's ubiquitous, the material is ubiquitous, and we are democratizing it. We're making it accessible and available to anyone. And so we conceptualize these projects around 3 ideas. One, about lightness. Typically, earthen structures are very heavy, but in fact, because we can corrugate and undulate the material, we can print very thin shell structures out of mud at large scales. And we're also thinking about how we might illuminate these in these landscapes at night, in these desert remote landscapes. The second is the beacon or the lookout, and how we can think about how we begin to 3D print program, such as stairs, for example. And basically, we're just scaling up the idea of how we might print using this material. The kiln, where we harvested local micaceous clays to 3D print pottery, learning from our friends just across the Colorado-New Mexico border. to make functional pottery that's low fire, made out of micaceous clays that are harvested from traditional sites, and ways to think about structure and build upon these very thin walls, holding two shells together with rot resistance juniper that's harvested from the forest just in the hills beyond, and think about how we might be able to introduce program into this, make a hearth and fire, a place for people to gather, the 3D printing of furniture, and places where people can come together. I'll take you for a quick walk in our COVID era laboratory, which is just a remote site in the borderlands, where we're 3D printing these objects, and the table is the landscape itself, and we're leaving them there and analyzing them at full scale. Many of these structures are experiments in creating domes and enclosures, thinking about how tall we can go, ways of creating openings and fenestration, the phenomena of light and texture and material in this landscape, but also experiments in ways that we can implement low-cost innovations to build faster and taller and stronger. And so what you see here is a third rail, which in the typical robotics world is quite expensive for, so let's say, a KUKA robot to travel along a track. Instead, we made ours out of wood, and we're moving the robot because it's so portable, so we can make a multicellular structure that can print very quickly, extruding the soil from the surrounding landscapes in ways that have been done for thousands of years, but embarking on and hybridizing a new technology in the borderlands. And using an innovation that is quite inexpensive and operated just with our cell phone. Showing what it looks like in our laboratory site. All these experiments led to something that we call casa covida. Covida in Spanish is a word that means something like cohabitation, but also looks like the word COVID, because it's a project that we built during the time of COVID to bring people together for cohabitation. It's sort of a prototype house for two people. In this remote landscape, we're experimenting with materials and how one could build very cheaply. We built this at a cost of $16 in materials. We partnered with friends and textile artists from the region to make the textiles and bedding for the 3 programs within the house. 1 is a place to sleep. 2 is a place to cook using the functional pottery and gather around warmth and fire. And the 3rd space is a place for bathing, harvesting the local waters that are warmed in a place where you can look at the skies and stars above. People often ask us, are you going to put a roof? And we quite enjoyed looking at the stars and the skies, but we had this idea for a hybrid roof that again mixes traditional technologies with contemporary innovations like pneumatics, and this pneumatic roof that imparted colors into the space itself, kind of the cherry on top of this chocolate sundae of a house. The ideas in the borderlands, as you've seen, expand to the material, the geopolitical, the geological, but also notions of how we can smuggle activism into design. And during the time that we were building these projects out in these remote environments, we were constantly bombarded with news of child separation at the US-Mexico border. And while we were in this remote environment and not able to participate in protest, we wanted to make a sign so that our friends in the cities could use during the protest, during the child separation. And we wanted to build upon the genius of this particular sign, which is quite iconic in the borderlands. This sign was created by a graphic designer who was a Native American from New Mexico named John Hood, who worked for the California Department of Transportation and was assigned to create a design for a sign that would warn motorists that people would be dropped off alongside the highway by human traffickers and might attempt to run across the highway so that motorists wouldn't hit them. And he smuggled in some beautiful aspects of design activism into this sign, because he related the plight of the immigrant today as that of the Navajo during the long walk when they were displaced from their own homelands. What's extremely interesting about this sign is the way that he thought very carefully about, for example, using a young girl with pigtails. He thought that's who drivers might empathize with the most. And he used the silhouette of the civil rights leader Cesar Chavez as the head of the father in the sign. And so we wanted to build upon the genius of this sign, and we made one simple move, which was to turn the families to each other, to face each other, and use the word reunite. And we made this an open source sign that people could download, and it began to be downloaded, and people began to use it in protest. But it also caught the attention of the largest public art campaign in the world called the For Freedoms Foundation. And we were able to bring this sign back to the highway in a way that we couldn't have imagined prior, which was in the form of an enormous digital billboard alongside the highway where hundreds of thousands of people could see. And so this idea of smuggling activism into design and hybridizing the condition, blurring the line between what is design, what is activism, and where the context in which this is displayed began to be something that we were very interested in. You can now see this sign at the walls of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. And people continue to download this sign. And for example, this artist is placing them throughout Los Angeles using the same company that makes the speed limit signs in Los Angeles and installing them to those signs. But smuggling them to other contexts as well, to think about how the use of art and design can become a form of activism in the context such of museums, for example, and how the facade of the Johnson Museum at Cornell was suddenly also a form of activism to communicate a message about how we might think about designing a United States and not a divided states, for example. So this idea of smuggling design into other contexts and smuggling activism into the context of design is something that is very interesting to us. And thinking about this hybrid idea of the borderlands and what an important laboratory is that is to explore these ideas. In that book, Border Walls Architecture, Virginia and I made a number of illustrations that told the story of the 800 miles of wall that were being constructed along the US-Mexico border at a cost of about $4 million per mile on average, sometimes up to $23 million a mile. And many of those illustrations, as Neil pointed out, border between political satire or political cartoons, the very seriousness of the issues that are present. They tell stories of, let's say, a biography of the border wall between the United States. But one of those illustrations that we made back in 2009 was an illustration that told the story of the border being a metaphorical fulcrum between labor relationships and trade relationships, those balances that are created between trade balances of two allied countries that are neighbors, but also the inequities that exist between wealth and poverty on both sides. And so these illustrations came in the form of drawings and architectural models that we called recuerdos or souvenirs that remember the time that we built a border wall and what a ridiculous idea that was. But this particular illustration called Teeter-Totter Wall was one that could potentially go beyond an illustration of the absurdity of the borderlands, but to be a project that could actually use the same material that the wall is made out of, but in fact, instead of divide communities, bring people together. And so we began the process of thinking about how this teeter-totter could exist in the world. And we began to calibrate it to the sites of the borderlands, how we might smuggle in the teeter-totter itself, insert it through the walls, those dimensions, how we might add the seats, and how it might be a collaborative effort on both sides to bring people together. And we worked with a metal fabrication shop in Juarez, Mexico. This is one of the very first rides of the teeter-totter, just seeing it as an object. And we had to think about its siting, how we would move from a metaphorical fulcrum to a literal fulcrum along the US-Mexico border, and how it would attach and how it would insert itself, how long Border Patrol would take to arrive once they saw us carrying a large object to the wall from the US side to the Mexico side. And we calibrated it such that we realized we had about 8 minutes to potentially have an event with families and children along the US-Mexico border. We collaborated with an art organization in Juarez called Colectivo Chopeque to build these structures and work with communities. And every aspect of this is a collaborative design, thinking very carefully about not only how it's sited, but what does it mean to build play as an act of resistance in a landscape of violence. And so while pink is a very fun color and it stands apart from the wall and it is a moment of joy, it also allows us to remember that that color pink in Juarez is used to remember the women who were killed during the time of violence in the city of Juarez, and has a very particular meaning on that front. And so with the continued news of child separation, the continued news of more construction of walls along the US-Mexico border to keep people apart and to actually cause damage to ecologies and environments and people, we decided that we would simply have the event one day. We didn't ask permission. We simply asked the communities if they would like to participate. They happily agreed, and this is how that day went. It was not moments before we slipped the teeter-totter into the wall that the children were climbing on them, that people were laughing, people were together. Border Patrol did show up within 10 minutes as we predicted. They asked what we were doing. We said we were having an event with the families and children, and they stood their ground at a distance, parked away, and allowed the event to continue. The Mexican National Guard arrived later, asked what was going on. We said we were having an event with children, and they too stood their ground. And so what was created that day was a sanctuary of space defined by women and children and grandmothers and aunts and the communities at the border, recognizing that the borderlands are public space, that this is a public project funded by public money, and we can in fact decide what happens in the borderlands. And if we don't want a wall, maybe we can decide that we don't want a wall and that wall can come down someday. But for this very moment, we wanted to demonstrate a very different narrative of the borderlands, that it's not a place where no one lives and where bad men are doing bad things, but in fact, it's a place where women and children live every day and do the things that people do all over the world with their children. They play, they take pictures on their cell phones, they post them to social media, and they experience joy despite the oppression of the wall that exists there today. And so, as Virginia said, for about 40 minutes, and no one stopped us. The reason that we stopped doing this is because, just like on any playground, the children were simply tired of playing and wanted to move on to something else. And so for those 40 minutes, this very small event was able to show the world that the actions that take place on one side have a direct consequence on the other. So I thank you for your attention. I thank you very much for this award, and we're very honored. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron and Virginia. We're getting comments in the chat here about people being blurry-eyed and amazing. This was a perfect way to I think round up our opening ceremony. Such a powerful project, such a beautiful project, such a witty project, and following on from a whole series of investigations and challenges and things. And I think you really have kind of opened up the possibility of how we as architects can reimagine and overcome these divisions. So this is a perfect emblem of, I think, what we're trying to do in Inclusive Futures. So congratulations on the award, and thank you for something so exquisitely beautiful. I'm getting comments here from our team in Africa for saying thank you for bringing people together, trying to bring people beyond words to describe. So this is such an inspiration and an exquisite project. Congratulations. We now, I think we're in a situation, Philip, where we can wrap things up. I think it'd be nice to at one point just to go and maybe put all our cameras on so we can all be seen for one brief moment. Can I invite everyone to put their cameras on so that we can see each other around the world? And I want to just say that we have Mike Shee in Australia, we have Nick Bow in Australia, we have Marina Rodriguez das Neves in in Argentina. We have Ahmed Hassab in Egypt. We have Mohammed Beju in Iran. And Felicia, I don't know who you are, Felicia, Pennsylvania, I guess. And Philip Yuan, of course, in China. So this is, in a way, our kind of version of the Teeter-Totter wall, a Teeter-Totter Zoom link and things. But we can't quite see Mohammed. I would just want to apologize for the connection with Wolf Prix, but we were trying to. He's due to come and join us again on the 3rd of July, and hopefully we'll try and get a recording of that from there. But can I congratulate all our award winners? Felicia, thank you for that exquisitely beautiful project, absolutely exquisitely. Wolf and Daniel, absolutely amazing, technologically so advanced. And Ron and Virginia, that was such a beautiful way to end things. Maybe I can invite my colleague Philip Yuan in China to say a few words to round things up.
Thanks a lot to all the presenters, and congratulations to the award. I think architecture intelligence is not just embedded in technology, but we can see it's kind of integration between the culture and the technology. So it's really fantastic presentations, and really amazing, mind-blowing. So we're looking forward in the next week, and we'll have the fabulous workshops, 109 workshops around the world. So a lot of workshops already start working day and night. So we're looking forward to see what's happening on YouTube and Bilibili in the next few weeks. And wish you have a nice time, and thanks a lot for everyone. And thanks and congrats to all the award winner tonight. Bye-bye.
Can I just finally just say one final thing to thank the team behind this. I always refer to them as icebergs because you only see 10%, but there's 90% behind. There's a huge amount of work that's been going on. I know this because the team have actually not been sleeping many nights. I also want to thank those who volunteered to teach workshops. I mean, what an incredible gesture. It's a really, really beautiful gesture to extend out there. I think you saw from the graphs that Philip was showing earlier what impact this is having around the world, particularly beyond the West to other countries. And I think let's hope this is just the beginning of something that can continue and build up for the future. Education, we believe, should be a human right and not a privilege of the West. And we want to share ideas on this platform to people throughout the world. So thank you for joining us for the opening ceremony. Thank you to all the team that's supporting us. Thank you to the workshop instructors and so on. And congratulations to our three very distinguished award winners today, Felicia Davis, Rael and Virginia Fratello, and Wolf Prix and Daniel Bolajan. Amazing work. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.